Well, we started the 2nd of October really, and we say, we'll say go with the calendar for this one. We said we go with October, and we weren't hanging around really, but we were literally the first field of winter barley we started in. We were in it 4 different times trying to sow the field. It's all emergent now, but that's how bad it was for the first 2 weeks.
No matter what part of the country you're in, everybody's been affected by the wet weather over the past few months. Most growers don't have as much planted as they planned, and areas which are planted, those crops are struggling. It's hard to keep positive, but we're all in this together. You're listening to the latest episode of the Tillage Edge with me, Michael Hennessy. We would really appreciate it if you could listen, follow, and give us a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcast from. The Teagasc farm in Oak Park, Carlow, is a mix of trials and commercial crops and faces the same problems of weather as every other farm in the area. I'm delighted to be joined by Brendan Burke, the farm manager, to chat about the autumn so far. Brendan, was the harvest delayed on the Oak Park farm the same as other farms around here?
It was a little bit, but not tremendously, because we have a pretty good spread of crops here. So although it was a bit on rugby terms, lift and go whenever you got the chance to get a good piece of weather. But we got through it all. Now, the last bits of spring barley and a bit of spring oats weren't particularly nice, and that we had these secondary and third tillers, I would say, coming through that were very, very green. And the difficulty then, do you spray with glyphosate, which you shouldn't. So we didn't, and we took the hit on those, but not big acreages now, which some farmers might have had, but there was late sown spring barley and late sown spring oats. Some of it for reasons that we needed to sow it late anyway, but they were quite difficult. So you had quarter of the field quarter of the field at 24% moisture and the rest of it at 18% moisture. So you had to mix and match your load a bit that you had a reasonable sample. So that was the tricky bit. And then, you could say you could have burned off if you were going in with a crop directly after, but some of our spring barley ground is going into spring barley again next year, so you wouldn't necessarily be wanting to have a bare sterile stubble left over winter. So that was a bit of a tricky one, but it was okay in the end. Now, but even some of the barleys that were sown in good time, some of them, because of weather, they were dropping heads, and they weren't green, but they were dropping heads off. So it was a bit of a salvage in some of them, but we got through it.
Okay, and you were well into September, finishing off the last of the barleys, were you?
Yeah, not badly. Yeah, not badly. It still was the first week of September, but you were kind of waiting for the ideal day when this spring barley would be getting riper, but it really wasn't. It was getting greener, if anything. Some of these tillers, which were really sitting up like golf greens, nearly sitting on top in the middle of the field in some places. So we had to just take you could have maybe took forage crop off and they were that green, but it wasn't much point. So it did bring down the average moisture, and it didn't do anything for yield either, because it was just.
And of course you had beans in the system as well. You were probably a bit later harvesting them again, were you?
They were a little bit hard, not a huge acreage. We'll probably have 15, 20 hectares of beans there last year. So it wasn't, and there was trials in that, which you were waiting for some of them to ripen because they were sown particularly late for trial reasons. And we had some lupins as well, which were late as well. So not a big amount of them, but just we really had to find that day and be ready to go at it. So we did get them all out of it, but pods were starting to shatter a little bit on beans on the ground before the combine rather than anything else.
And in terms of the ups and downs, Brendan, same as every other farm, there was probably some good yields and maybe not so great yields around the farm. And I know it's a bit more difficult on the research farm to kind of get those averages. But what kind of struck out for you, I suppose, ups and downs?
Ups and downs, I suppose. The spring barley was particularly poor. Like, you wouldn't really even like to. I know I could take out, like, say, there was a bit of this field was in trials and everything like that, but there was a lot of it didn't hit 2 ton at all, I'd say. On those dry fields which you had the secondary growth, and then the rye actually was particularly. I said that the last time, I think the rye was particularly interesting, that it yielded very well across a whole block that was in trials. The wheats were okay. The wheats didn't look nice at all. Like, they were very poor quality and color. Like, you didn't really see a day when the combine was in dust. That was just getting through it. Yields were okay in the wheat, I'd say, and oilseed rape was okay, but probably the rye was the one which stood out a little bit better. But
apart from rye, a pretty ordinary year then, really, all around.
The barley, the barley, and it was because of our lighter soils that the barley ran out of steam very quickly. in June and didn't regain any of that yield that it could have got, I suppose.
In terms of, and you mentioned it there, in terms of the stubble coming afterwards.
Yeah.
Are you, or is the farm, because being a Teagasc farm, is that subject to the same rules as everybody else in the sense of you have to cultivate after harvest and leave 20% left and that kind of
Oh,
thing?
it is, and believe it or not, we do get inspected. And I'm not saying there's anything wrong with getting inspected, because we have to work well with the Department of Agriculture officials that do come here, and they look at and measure our areas the same as everybody else. And yeah, we do go through the whole regime and see that our figures add up, because it's partially the BIS scheme is automated, and that it will tell you your figures are wrong. So we will still have a claim in for all our areas, and if our figures don't match up on the auto calculator on it, they would have a check on it. So yeah, we would have got inspected this year, the same as every other year nearly. But yeah, we do the same stubble management, and we sowed. It was a good year for putting in for stubble cultivations, that there was plenty of in between days that we weren't harvesting, and we got straw moved off, and we had plenty of time that we weren't ready to sow, and it wasn't, well, it was earlier than that anyway, but so we got to turn up
And
stubbles.
you started the winter barley probably very early, same as everybody else. It's probably June, I'd say, when you started. Did you get any cover
Yeah.
crops in after those? And how
Yeah,
did they
we did
perform?
on most of the barley ground. We got cover crops of celia and vetch. We've obviously tried to move away from any of the brassicas, because we have an issue with clubroot here, which has appeared in 2 or 3 fields, which we stepped away from putting in any oilseed rape on our farm here. And we may have it in outside sites for trials, but on our own farm here, we haven't put in any this year, because it's even in the volunteer. Stephen Kildea has gone around on the volunteer rape that was there before we planted some wheat. There was evidence of clubroot in it, so we kind of trying to stay away from that. So we
And how did that cover? How did it perform, Brendan? Is it as big as other years, or not so great?
Yeah, no, they actually have been much better looking this year now that we got them in reasonable time, and we got to disc them. It was disked with a seed autocast on the back of it, and then they rolled it directly after it. And pretty much everything grew in it, because you had that nicer moist soil to go in, and enough cover on it. Where last year we had the same process, but poor enough establishment, because it was dry and hard last September. So it feels all look lovely and green now over winter, and there will be plenty of biomass there to break down and to add to our organic matter, hopefully, and help with nitrates as well. So
Which obviously we need in Oak Park soils,
yeah.
certainly the lighter end of it anyway. Speaking of which, organic manures, is there any or much applied across the farm, or is there any restrictions, I suppose, being a research farm and not interfering with
Yeah,
trials, if you like?
that is the problem. We wouldn't have a lot. We don't have. We have some livestock here, but they're not. They're overwintered on slats. So we've just slurries, which we put out on our generally our pre-oilseed rape. If we have any, we very little. We'd only 20 cattle last winter, but we have compost. We call compost, which would be straws and soils and grass cuttings and all that. So we'd have about 200 or 300 tons of that. Now we spread that. We only let it from or break down for a year really, and turn it out then as best we can, because we don't want to have too much stuff in a yard, or we have to collect water off or effluent off. So that's spread, but it is tricky to know where to go with it. That ideally you wouldn't be putting in a trial in the field. You're spreading that on this year.
Okay, because you can have kind of big bits and small bits, in terms of you could have twice the amount
Exactly,
of
and
organic
even
manures in one spot, which could feck up a trial. And
yeah, even the spreaders are pretty good spreaders, a rear delivery, but and trying to evaluate exactly how much there isn't weigh cells or anything like that on it, because we don't have enough to have that sort of equipment to go and spread that and make sure it's evenly across it. And then if it's not fully composted, it does tend to go on lobs of big forkfuls rather than broken up in small bits. So we wouldn't ideally go in there. So it might be an area where there might have been going into potatoes next year, which they can take a lot of compost anyway, but it will be going back into this crop is going back to spring barley, so it's spread out pretty well.
So turning, Brendan, then to autumn plantings, obviously you have some in, because I've seen some around the place. But when did you start? When was the first crop?
Well, we started the 2nd of October really, and we say we'll say go with the calendar for this one. We said we go with October, and we weren't hanging around really, but we were literally. The first field of winter barley we started in, there's a big chunk is right in front of the house there. You might know we were in it 4 different times trying to sow the field. So it's like it's all has emerged now. It's nice enough. but it's in 4 different sowing days. Now it doesn't matter to it because there's 4 different trials in it, but it was just all over the place. It's all emerging now, but that's how bad it was for the first 2 weeks. And you say we weren't really dilly-dallying, I'd say, and we have plenty of equipment here, we can get out at it, but you say, well, it might be a bit better tomorrow, but it was a bit worse in most cases. So
Okay.
same
Same
as
as
everywhere,
everybody
you
else
know.
then. And was there anything else, any other kind of maybe very smaller bits that were sown for research? I know BYDV kind of trials were within earlier.
It was, yeah, yeah. Louise McNamara has a trial there, and we sowed actually one in the second week of September for winter barley for looking at her aphid monitoring. So now there's varieties in that, and then she's putting different products on actually to see. So it's literally only 20 rep or 20 treatments or something like that. And and then we sowed the same. We blocked that field and we sowed the same then on the 14th of October. And it was easy enough to sow it on the 14th of September. It was okay conditions, but we sowed the second half, what we call it, in between plots on the 14th of October. But and we had the same. It's down in Tipperary, I think it's South Tipperary. So it's that one was sowed early, and then she has another tramline trial on looking at aphid as well. So it's
Of course, I'm just thinking of you planting infills around a trial. In the middle of it, there's all sorts of problems there in terms of stopping and starting and rolling over ground and all that kind of stuff, and it makes it very difficult, I presume.
well, exactly that field now. It's only 7 acres in the field, but we infilled it on the 14th of October. The second sowing of winter barley on that, but we only got to sow the headlands early last week, or one of the
Okay.
last Saturday, I think. Yeah, actually, because it wasn't a great day, but we just had an island of stuff in the middle with mucky headlands all around it. So it's not pretty, but it's sown anyway.
It's in. I think there's a lot of farmers out there would probably say that it's not pretty, but it's in. Not sure what'll happen
Yeah,
afterwards,
it's
but
in,
it's
yeah,
in.
yeah, and it's like I was even just checking on it actually. Some of the wheats we sowed last week actually have chitted already, so there's still plenty of temperature and a good temperature in
Sure.
the soil, so it's growing anyway. So, but hopefully we could do it another
And
week.
in an overall kind of basis, then Brendan, on the farm, how close to normal or what you'd like to have planted, how much of that is actually in?
We're probably 80% of it, I'd say, of the winter sowing. Now there's a couple of fields you could say, well, we'll definitely leave them now for spring barley. You know, they weren't particularly that they had to be in wheat for rotation, or they weren't particularly going into a trial area. So we'll leave those because there's really no point in them. They're okay, but there is maybe bits of sticky spots in them, and there's no point in
Sure.
mucking through those. You know, we generally our ground is flat here and easy enough. It's turning over okay, but just when you're turning on headlands and that, you have a complete porridge on the headlands. So what do you do then? And we have 3 fields with wheat sown in the trials in the field. Headlands are not done, and that's the mucky, messy bit.
So you're still trying to tip away and put in a few little bits this week or last week, were
Yeah,
you?
yeah, we got a little bit on Friday, sorry, last Friday, and we got a little bit on Monday, and we have a little bit today, which is Thursday. Yeah, a little bit today as well. So it's actually, but I've left actually some of this actually much drier fields to sow now that if we get stuck all together, we can sow those, and they're okay.
And is that plowing up? I know it's really light
It's
land here,
plowing up
obviously, and
okay.
that's
That's
plowing
plowing
up.
up, but
Okay,
it's just the twisting and turning on headlands that's leaving this
sure.
complete muck and
And I presume you're not including any of the ground across in Knockbeg, which is, for our listeners, is the far side of the river from
yeah.
Oak Park, and it's different ground altogether. It's more clay based, very
More
much
clay based,
heavier.
yeah, yeah. No, there's one block there which normally go in. There's a systems trial over there, cultivation systems, that Dermot Forrester looks after. So that has a full block of headland all around that. That'll be going to spring barley. So there's no
Okay,
point in it's
it's
a little,
difficult.
yeah. It's no point in it because you would be
Sure.
mucking up around the headland as well.
And obviously that's one end of it, and the other end of it then is probably weed control. What are the main targets of weeds that you have around the farm that you're trying to
Well, it'd
control over
be
the autumn time, winter time?
yeah, it's supposed to be our grass weeds are on your meadowgrass and that, and just keeping that a check, and then you just your broadleaves then, I suppose. But it's not nothing done, and we wouldn't generally be in a rush to go out. Ideally, you go out just after sowing, but we haven't had any chance to do that. So then even the sprayer hasn't been looked at even, and even if we did, I think the tram lines and everything are so mucky now. You'd be doing a lot of messing. So hopefully we get a nice dry week in the end of November, and it's not frosty or something like that. We might get out there with something like Firebird and that, and then come back in the springtime, probably with something else to tidy up, because we'll have problem
Do like
weeds.
that. So in terms of the broadleaves you mentioned, what are the kind of the big ones that I suppose that you find difficult to control as much as anything else?
Yeah, the speedwell and groundsel probably, and
Right.
there's quite a bit of poppy in
A bit of
pockets.
poppy as well, yeah, I
Yeah,
think
yeah,
around as well. As long as you get rid of those, it's not so bad. So
yeah,
yeah, so it's all waiting to be done. And
yeah,
if it's not done till later on, so be it. It probably won't
yeah.
be, I suppose, at this
Well,
stage
the
either.
soil now, we got a nice new roller this year to ready to go, but we haven't used it at all, which is great.
Right.
So all excited about this.
Probably wise, I'd say. I'm looking at a few fields out there, and certainly anything that's was rolled on or driven on afterwards,
Yeah,
it's not looking great.
no, and that's the soil. Like I've gone into most of the fields that they're sowed at 2 weeks now in a week, but they're a bit cloddy on the top, but they're not capping, So
Mm.
even though they got a lot of rain, so I'm not sure whether that's an advantage or not. But it looks a little better than if it was flat rolled, or it could be smeared and could have water pockets in it. So any wheel marks you'd see, from even the drill, you'd say, yeah, a little bit of water sitting there, but they're not. It doesn't seem to be sitting on the sowed stuff anyway.
Okay. And actually, just to talking about wet log soils and that kind of stuff, slugs is a huge problem out there this year in lots of different farms. Is there an issue at all
Yeah, we've been
for Oak
counting them a
Park?
bit, and we're getting the 4 or 5 slugs under a slate or under a little thing on a couple of different fields now. We have gone with slug pellets. They're particularly, we know our fields probably pretty well here because we're on the same farm all the time. I am, rather than if you're contracting or if you're taking Connacht, or you mightn't be sure, but we know patches where there is slugs, so it's easy enough to identify them, and they don't seem to move a huge amount within the field. But if they're in that 2 or 3 acre block in the middle, they're there, and we've fed them up as best we can in the last couple of weeks. So and they have
You're keeping a
particularly,
good eye on them anyway until the crop gets up to 3 or 4 leaf stage.
yeah, on the rye, we've rye sown actually, and they have seemed to be quite interested in that. So we really found the spot in the field, but we've given them slug pellets, so hopefully we'll keep them a bit at bay anyway.
Final one or two, just wanted to chat to you about in terms of so obviously every farmer has to manage hedges, and Oak Park will be no different.
Yeah.
There's a lot of new hedges around Oak Park, certainly towards the middle of the farm.
Yeah,
What's the management process for those, or any of those included in research along the line?
they're not, well, they could be in research any day, but they're not as such. We planted them as part of the schemes as well, but they're a mixed species of native Irish radium white thorns and that. But they're 3 years planted now, and so they were cut right back on the first winter, and they were let then develop out pretty much. They've got a good width on them now, and getting up to maybe 2 meters tall. So we haven't taken them down on the top, really, just trim them in a little bit on the side, just to, I don't, it's a bit of a debate whether you should square them off or not, but just to not let them get too wild. It's only taken, it could be only 1 or 2 branches every 4 or 5 meters along, so, and we hopefully then leave some of the white thorns to develop further, and leave, go to maybe 2.5 meters in the height there, those hedges. So they're looking nice now. There's plenty of berries and stuff on them, and their leaves are all come off them now.
You're trying to manage them as best you can anyway for wildlife and all that kind of thing as much as you can anyway.
Catherine Keena has the environment specialist. She has one new planting we did there last spring, where we just actually said because of the tillage farmer, said, what will a tillage farmer do? How will a tillage farmer plant these? That it's not in it. It's in it. So I said we basically just dropped the plow with just the back body and turned over a sod as deep as we could with the back sod, and just put them in that, and she was quite happy as a little experiment. So we did 50 meters of that, and then she covered 50 meters with plastic mulch, and then we didn't cover the other. So she just wants to look at that, see what sort of weeds are going to develop on that. So it's kind of a double. It's not a single row of.
And it's great to expect. The research farm has got all sorts of research from
Yeah.
from wheat to hedges and everything else in between. The final one I want to ask you about, Brendan, is obviously it's been extremely wet. I suppose on the other side of it, Oak Park is a very dry site, but nonetheless, as I come in and out days, you'd see a bit of water line here and there. Is there any areas on the farm where you were looking at them now and you're kind of thinking, oh, maybe I should have done a little bit of additional drainage, or maybe there's something I'm going to have to do there for the future?
There is. We had a couple of little areas marked that last. The crop that came off, and there was little maybe half-acre blocks that got water sitting on them last winter. So we said we'd go with those this autumn, but before sowing. But there really wasn't a chance of going at them, and I think there's no point in. I know we're going to have the same thing again next year, say, but if you're going mucking in with a digger or a track machine, you're probably going to do as much harm this year, and then because there's very few open drains here, but there is stone box culverts, I suppose, or shores, which are there for centuries. And we have linked in with those, but it's a tricky business. You wouldn't want to be in any rush to go straight across the field to the nearest lowest point, because you have to link up with these. And we've did it, and we've found old maps here which are quite good and show a little broken line where there is a shore, and linked up with one or two of those in fields where there was water sitting there maybe 5 or 6 years ago. So it's a slow process to do it, because you have to literally go inch by inch and find this box shore, and they work quite well because it seemed to, but to just get backed up in some places, but to find them and to work properly with them rather than just going straight through.
There's maintenance, I suppose, needed on all ground, no matter where you're going. Brendan, listen, thanks very much for your time. Delighted you could join us, and look, we'll touch base with you maybe in the new year and see how you're getting on, see maybe how crops are looking at that stage. Thanks again, Brendan.
Okay, Michael, thanks.
So that's it for this week, and a huge thanks to Brendan for joining me on the show. Final reminder that the Teagasc ECT Grass Conference takes place in the Killashee Hotel on November the 8th at 10:30 a.m. That's next Wednesday in the Killashee Hotel. The event will delve into the increasing problems of grass weeds and Irish tillage farms, including blackgrass, herbicide-resistant wild oats, and Italian ryegrass, and more. We will hear from a number of farmers who have been working with the project over the past 5 years, and it really promises to be an excellent event. So finally, don't forget, if you enjoyed the podcast, and recommend it to a friend or colleague. And as always, rate, review, and follow on Apple or Spotify so you never miss an episode. And for more information, go to teagasc.ie. I'm Michael Hennessy. Thanks for listening. I'll be back next week with more tillage news and advice.